Hey everybody, I'm Chef Rosser, and today we're going to learn how to fabricate a chicken according to ACF and EPCC criteria. So I've got a whole bird here. I've got my ice tray, and I'm going to keep the parts separate as I fabricate this. So what's the first cut that I make on a chicken? Well, it doesn't really matter as long as you have a plan to finish the rest of that bird. Now before I start doing any cuts, I want to inspect this bird. I want to remove any large pieces of fat on there, and then right inside this cavity there's a very large chunk of fat right there. I'm going to set that aside. Get a little bit more of that off. And I want to have some paper towels handy so that I can remove any feathers or bits of skin that I don't want on there. So I like having dry paper towels to do that. Or you can use your knife and just cut a little bit off, and it shouldn't disrupt the rest of that bird. Okay? So I want to turn my bird up and look for any fat around the neck. There's oftentimes a larger piece of fat just under the skin, and we want to gently pull that off so that we can start our fabrication. Alright, so while I've got the bird turned up on end like this, I'm going to trim out the wishbone, which is the collar. There's one side of the wishbone, and here is the other. If you can see that. So I'm going to work my fingers up to the top of that bone and pull that thing out intact. There's the complete wishbone. Right, set that in my tray. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the structure of the bird. One breast may be larger than the other, or you may have a tear in the skin. So I want to pick the breast that's going to be the nicest one for the plated presentation of that airline breast. So if you can see this side looks slightly fuller. That is the breast that I want to save for the airline. So with that being said, I'm going to take the end of this wing off so that I can know that that is my airline breast side. So I'm going to hold the chicken up by the wing. I'm going to cut just below the second joint all the way around down to the bone with my boning knife all the way around, and I'm going to use the back of my knife to scrape the bone down. And you need to hear that kind of metal on bone sound to know that you're getting it nice and clean. And what you're trying to do is remove all of the membranes and connective tissue from that bone, get a nice clean bone visible, and then you're going to dislocate, bend this wing joint back the way it doesn't want to go in one quick snap. And there we have that nice exposed bone with very little cleanup needing to be done after that. And we've got the rest of our wing right here. Okay, so that tells me that I'm saving this side for my airline breast. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the other wing intact. So I'm going to turn the chicken on its breast. I'm going to find the lowest spot, and I'm going to make a shallow cut, and then I'm going to just let my knife feel its way down into the joint, and it's a scooping cut. I'm going to come down into the joint and back out, and I have a nice clean wing intact. I'm going to fold it up and set it aside for presentation. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the leg and thigh. I'm going to cut through the skin just to keep these visible. I don't want to cut into the meat at all, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving plenty of skin to cover my airline breast. So I'm going to come forward here. I'm going to turn the chicken on its side and just follow that cut. And if you notice, I'm not cutting into any of the usable meat or into the rib cage. So I'm going to bring this all the way back, and then I dislocate this hip joint right down here. and you'll feel a slight pop, and you can oftentimes see the bone come out. So that is dislocated. And what I like to do that so that it lays flat and gives me a stable base to cut the breast off. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. I don't need to worry about the skin so much on this side because I'm going to remove the skin from that chicken breast. But I don't want to cut into the usable meat. So open that up. I'm going to bring that down and dislocate this guy. And you'll see the head of the femur pops out and it lays flat. It gives me that stable base to cut these off of. All right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the airline breast off. Okay? So, and it doesn't matter which side that airline breast is on. It can be on the right side or the left side. And don't be afraid to turn your bird to get the appropriate angle for your knife. So I'm just cutting through the skin so that I can see where my knife cuts are going. My airline breast is on this side, so I'm going to cut on that side of the keel bone, which is that breastbone. And what I like to do is use my thumb to pull the meat away from the rib cage so that I can see where I'm cutting. And I make sure that I don't take any cartilage with it. And I'm just using the very tip of my knife and making little flicking cuts forward. I'll come back, take that skin off, turn my bird a little bit, and I'll angle the chicken so you can see where I'm cutting. And I want you to pay attention. I have the wing bone in my fingers. I'm pulling the whole thing away from the carcass. The whole airline breast is coming away from the carcass, and my knife is gliding along the rib cage the entire time so that I'm not leaving usable meat behind. If you look at this carcass, it's nice and clean and no meat left behind. So this last cut can be a little tricky. You come back, find that wing joint, and carefully cut around that. So this is the beginnings of my airline breast right here. You'll notice that it is intact. I'm checking for bone chips or anything. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tenderloin out. And the tenderloin is held in with a membrane, and I want to make sure that I get the membrane off too. So it looks like the membrane came with the tenderloin. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and just very gently peel that off. And that goes into my scrap pile. All right. We'll do the fabrication of the tenderloin in just a little bit, but I need to get that on ice for now. I'm also going to put my airline chicken breast on ice while I finish fabricating the whole bird. All right. So the next cut I'm going to do is on the supreme or the boneless, skinless breast. I'm going to go ahead and take the skin off of this guy so I can see where I'm cutting. So I just make an incision in the skin and pull that whole piece of skin back. You want to keep this skin intact and you want to save it. This makes a great crisp on the plate. So you want to save these guys. Those are really nice to crisp up and use as a garnish. So here's my skinless chicken breast, and we're going to make it boneless right now. So same cut, we're going to come down the other side of that keel bone, and I'm going to do the same procedure where I'm pulling it away from the carcass with my thumb and just making little flicking cuts with the very tip of my knife. Come forward. And I don't mind cutting extra connective tissue, fat, or the rib meat off because I can go back and clean that up later. All right. So here's my boneless, skinless breast. Again, we're going to remove the tenderloin very gently and being mindful to get that membrane out of there too. All right. So here's the tenderloin with the membrane intact, and we're going to just real gently pull that off. Now, in larger birds, sometimes you need to cut the membrane off, but in smaller birds, it's relatively tender and easy to take off intact. So there's my two tenderloins. Here is my boneless, skinless breast. It's rather ugly right now, so we're gonna set that aside and we'll come back and trim that up. All right? So then the last steps that I need to do are remove the leg and thigh portion and then separate those. Okay? Dislocated that leg and thigh from the rest of the carcass, and we're gonna just make that cut forward. And there is the whole leg and thigh, and the oyster is intact right there. We still need to clean this up and separate it, but I'm going to put it on my ice pan to hold it. This is that divot in the hip joint where the oyster lives. So there's that little tiny scrap of meat on there. So that's a good fabrication. We're going to do the same cut on the other side. We're just going to come in from a different angle. And again, having our knife glide along the bone. And don't be afraid to turn that chicken to the angle that is most comfortable for you. All right, there's my other one. Here's my oyster intact. I've got a little bit of bone chip down here. We're going to clean that up in just a second. But let's look at the carcass. Okay, so as an instructor, when I evaluate, I look for usable meat on the carcass, and this side is really nice and clean. It looks like on this side, I left a tiny bit right there. That I would have rather had that on the breast, but it is nominal. So we'll put that over in the scrap. The rest of the carcass is nice and clean. Those oysters are out nicely. We didn't leave a lot of meat next to the tail, so that's a good looking carcass. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna separate the leg and thigh from each other. But before we do that, I need to make sure that there's no little bone chips anywhere, and there are a few, because some of these bones are a little soft, and we're just going to trim those off, and that goes into our scrap pile. I'm going to come up here and get this one off too, and the best way to feel for that is just use your fingertip, and you'll feel anything that is crunchy or firm, you want to get that off. Okay, so that's a clean fabrication right there, no more bone chips or cartilage. Clean my hand off real quick. All right, so to separate the leg and thigh from each other, this is the interior part of it. We want to look for this line of fat around that knee joint of the animal. So that is not where we need to cut, but it's close to it. And you want to feel with your finger to find a low spot right there. You want to straighten out that leg and thigh as much as you can. Get your knife into that low spot and one clean cut. You want to make sure that there's no red bone exposed. All you want to see is cartilage. So that went through the joint appropriately. Then we want to take a look at our pieces, and any long flaps of skin we want to trim off, just so that we have a nice presentation piece. So this leg is nice, and we're going to lay out this thigh and make sure we have a nice piece. So there's a little extra skin over here. I'm just going to trim that off, put that in my scrap pile, and roll this up for presentation. All right, do the same thing on the next one. Trim it up here a little bit. Feel for any bone chips. I got some tiny right there. Get that out. Double check my work. It's good. Straighten that guy out. Find my low spot and single cut, no red bone. Trim any excess skin or fat or connective tissue that may be hanging out of there. Same thing on the thigh. It's a little slippery. All right. Roll that up for presentation. Okay. There we go. All right, next we're going to move on to cleaning up our boneless, skinless breast, and what we want to do is simply take off the fat and the membranes that are going to make this piece look kind of weird on a plate or make it shrink up. The membranes, when they cook, they will cause it to shrink and curl, so we definitely want to get those off. All right? So if you can see, our scrap pile is still relatively small, so we're not losing a lot of product by trimming this up. Okay, so I've got this side is pretty much clean. I'm going to come in and trim it just a little bit. And what I like to do is angle my knife pretty steeply and just get any of that trim off of there. We want to take as little usable product off of there as possible, so this side's nice and clean. We're going to look at this side. I'm going to trim off this little piece of fat right there. And then we're going to turn this guy over. And there's a large nerve and artery on the underside. And what I like to do is just slide my knife right under there, cut in one direction, hold it up, and do a very shallow cut out, because that can taste kind of funky. So there is our boneless, skinless Supreme. All right, that's ready for presentation. We're going to turn our attention to our airline breast, and we're going to do much of the same to this. However, it can be a little tricky with the skin on there. We need to pay attention that we don't disrupt the skin too much. We need to keep that skin intact, and we want to make sure that it spreads over the entire surface of that chicken, but we're going to need to move it aside a little bit to trim some of the fat and membrane out. Right? So get some of that off. And bring that same cut forward. There we go. So that part's done. I'm going to turn it over, and sometimes there's a lump of fat on the underside, so we want to make sure that we're not going to have any large pieces of fat on the underside, because it can cause this breast to cook a little irregularly. We're going to trim a little bit of skin. We're going to come in and get that nerve out of there. So a shallow cut underneath it, just kind of a push under there, and pull it out backwards. There we go. And spot one more little chunk of fat that I want to get out. And I'm going to just look for excess skin to trim off. All right. The next thing we're going to work on, I'm going to trim up this skin just a touch. I don't want a big dangler on the front of that thing. So we need to fabricate the bone. So what I'm going to do is scrape any remaining tissue off of that bone, and I'm going to make the one cut that we're going to do with our chef knife. So this bone has a curved side, or a flat side and a curved side. So the curve is up here, and that's what we want. We want the flat side in contact with our cutting board. We're going to use the heel of our chef's knife, and we're going to cut about 1/8 of an inch flat off of the top of that bone. And that's just to have a nice presentation. So that is as much as I took off of that bone. It's really nice and soft there at the end. So we're going to set that aside, and we have our nice presentation airline breast. Okay? All right, so what is next? I believe that's it. What? Oh, the tenderloins, yes. We need to clean up the tenderloins. Right? So, depending on how large the bird is and how easy these tenderloins are to access, you want to expose the tendon inside of that tenderloin, and it's just a very shallow knife cut. You just want to get it under there. And with these smaller birds, what I like to do is just kind of scrape out the tenderloin. So, but I need to expose it so that I can grab a hold of it. All right, so there it's exposed, and I can pull at it, and you can use a paper towel to hold it, or you can, I'll put it on the cutting board and hold it down with my thumb, and then I use the back of my knife just to scrape forward, just real gently. And kind of split in half on me. There we go. That is the tendon inside of there. And sometimes this will kind of shred your tenderloin. Now for presentation, you just want to reshape it. I'm going to pull this little piece of fat off of there. You just want to reshape it in your hand and put it on your presentation tray for your chef to evaluate. Okay, so there's one. Here's the other. I'm going to pull that little piece of fat off first. The tendon is exposed, so I'm going to hold it down on the board with my thumb, use the back of my knife, and just very gently scrape forward with the back of the knife. There's the tendon in our scrap pile. And this, you saw a little bit more of that shredding action from taking out that tendon. And we're just gonna put this down and reshape it, and we will put it on our tray for presentation. That's chicken fabrication. Hi, Chef Roster here. If you like this video, please leave us a comment, subscribe, and click for notifications so you don't miss out on our latest videos. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.